Greetings YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about a free PDF that I got online. Cerulean Seas. It's sub-labeled as an underwater campaign, a D20/3.5 campaign created and written by Ember Kubisz. It requires the use of the D&D core rulebooks by the Wizards of the Coast. Now, I found this years ago, and it's a substantial tome. I mean, it's 350 pages of material. And when I went to look for it again to put a link in my list of free PDFs, I couldn't find it anymore. I've done searches for Cerulean Seas, and all I can find is people selling sea salts. And I've done searches for the author herself and had no luck whatsoever. So if anyone who ever sees this video can find who this person is, send me a link. But if it was freely available at one point, so I'm going to assume it's still freely available, and since it's no longer out there, if someone wants a copy, contact me. This is a campaign based about an entirely, or almost entirely, aquatic campaign. The basic premise is that at one time in the past, there were three strata of life on this planet. The planet's name is never actually referred to. There were a sky city, a huge sky city that floated above the world, full of divine beings that were pretty much in charge of everything. Then there were the land folks, pretty much your absolute dead straight normal fantasy campaign. And then there was the races that lived in the oceans. And unknown to the people on the surface or in the sky, they were at war. The oceans, the Suan, Saugan, the shark folks, were at war with a number of other races, and it was a massive fight going on. And it had been raging for centuries. Well, for some strange reason, and it's never explained why, the Sky City falls into the sea, specifically the Cerulean Bay. And when this happens, the folk living on the land are distraught. They see this as a sign that the divine powers are not divine, and they break their contract with the divine powers. Now, by doing this, they unleash a natural force that they didn't even know was in play. There were 7 maelstroms, 7 huge whirlpools, one in each of the planet's seas. Again, playing off the 7 seas of our world. And when they break the contract with the gods, these maelstroms stop draining. And what these maelstroms were doing, they were keeping the ocean level from going higher. So suddenly, there's nothing to stop the water from rising, and rise it does. And as it rises, it swallows almost all of the land. How much land is never actually implied in the game, in the campaign, but I'm thinking at least 90% of it. So you're only going to end up with the world with mountaintops left. This campaign lets you actually have a world like the silly movie Waterworld, because there isn't enough ice on Earth for that to ever happen. But in this world, because you're dealing with magic, you can actually have a world where only mountaintops are left. So the races on the surface are destroyed, and the shift in the ocean environment is huge. It turns the tide in the war, and the sharkmen lose. And so in the aftermath of all this, you have a new world. You have a world where the oceans are much bigger, where all the ocean races now have huge amounts of new territory to explore, which are, for the most of them, are incredibly different because they've never been exposed to them. But I don't actually see this as a complete campaign. I see this as a toolkit. You combine this with the Stormwrath book from Wizards of the Coast, and you can run a campaign. But there are some things left really open. For example, some of the races presented, frogmen, crocodile men, the selkies, which are, sea lions and sea seals that can turn into sea elves. These things need land to live. Without land for them to breed and lay eggs or have pups or things like that, they cannot survive. So there has to be some land left, which is cool, fine. Another thing that's left out is how fast the seas rise and what happens to some of the surface races. Now, some of the races obviously aren't going to make it. The dwarves, they live underground. When the oceans rise, there isn't going to be a time for them to change their society fast enough to get away. But some of the races should be able to survive in some contexts. Humans, halflings, and gnomes to come to mind to me. There are still ice caps in the world, which means they could have an Inuit-like structure, society, living on some of those ice caps. There are seafaring races still. The frogmen still build ships. So if they still build ships, that means that there's wood, technology, and the other races that used to be land-based could be using the same things. There's also the possibility that, depending on how fast the seas rise, some of these races have adapted, becoming amphibious or fully aquatic, and end up becoming the unwanted cousins to the sea races that live there. And there are a lot of sea races presented in here. Fishmen, lizard men, crocodile men, the Selkies, a couple of different races of Fae. Then they also present what they call true form races, where you could play creatures that look just like real-life animals, but have been awakened. You can play sharks, you can play dolphins, you can play octopus. The octopus are called swibbins. I thought the swibbins was a really cool name. And they are really interesting. I think this presented some really cool stuff. But there isn't any reason that the GM and who wanted to run this kind of campaign couldn't dictate how fast the seas rise. You want the seas to rise really fast? You say they rise a foot every hour. Boom! Within 2 weeks, everything's gone. But if you said the seas rise 1 foot every day, then you're talking 3 to 5 years before the seas get to their final height. All right? And that gives enough time for the races that can adapt, like, say, the halflings, the gnomes, and the humans, to this new environment. They build ships, they build rafts, they find ways of floating sections of land to become floating islands. They move to the polar caps. There is a possibility that small segments, I'm looking at a timer, sorry, small segments could make it. And I think that would have added an interesting dimension, because they would now be refugees. The people that used to control the world now don't anymore. And they could be trying to reverse this process. They could be trying to find a way to turn the maelstroms, the great whirlpools back on, reconnect with the gods, make amends. Now, one cool thing about this is that great city that fell into the sea, it's still there. The races that lived on it may have all been wiped out, but the city itself has healed. It's at the bottom of the Cerulean Sea, and it's being used by new races. And I think that's a really cool thing. A magical city that goes from being in the sky to being at the bottom of a sea. And the Cerulean Sea is a shallow sea, so there's lots of opportunities for the races of all kinds of different kinds to be there. Fully aquatic, the amphibious, and even some of the surface dwellers that may still survive as refugees in whatever way you want to think about them. A great opportunity to really run a water world-like campaign. There's a lot of useful stuff in this. There are a lot of things I don't understand why she included. She included the entire text of all the classes that are in the SRD, the OGL. I don't know why she did this. It says on the cover you need the book. She renamed a couple of them, like druids were named kahunas, and the rangers were named mariners. That's fine. You could have done, I think, everything that she changed as far as the individual class abilities and the class names could have been on like 1 or 2 pages. And you would have saved a lot of this text. You could have cut this book down by 30 pages. But she chose not to. So that's her call, not mine. But if you like undersea stuff, and I use undersea adventures in every single campaign I have ever run, fantasy, science fiction, science fantasy, you name it, there's always going to be an aquatic adventure in my campaigns. Post-apocalyptic, doesn't matter. I love aquatic adventures. And this is a very cool toolkit for someone that wants to run this kind of aquatic campaign in a fantasy world. So if you want a copy, contact me and I'll see about mailing you one, because I don't know how you access it otherwise. But I think it was very cool, it was a good read, and I encourage anyone who wants a copy to get one.